Hey guys, welcome back. So now with us recently getting back into the War of Realms, I feel like it's very necessary that I bring up a few other topics that are deep throwbacks within the Marvel lore that have not only resurfaced but seem to echo throughout a number of the tie-ins. And not just the tie-ins, but even the tie-ins of the tie-ins. And I feel like we got a few of those towards the beginning of Asgardians of the Galaxy, which mixed up some of the old stuff with some completely brand new stuff. But nonetheless, it's like a few of those things that you just can't brush over. So if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so to start this off, I really gotta begin with the connective tissues that bring this all into perspective with what we talked about recently. And to do so, we gotta go back to your 2016 Thanos series, because throughout this series we got the introduction to the God Quarry, which mainly served the purpose of reinstituting Thanos' lost godhood, and through the course of doing that, showing us how it worked, because whoever falls into the God Quarry, or is thrown into the God Quarry, or jumps into the God Quarry, and I'm not really sure how many of these people who are stuck in the God Quarry actually jumped in aside from Thanos, but perhaps we'll hear a few more of their stories on a later date. But with revisiting the 2016 Thanos series, there was a point in time more specifically where the battle between Thanos and Thane had led us back to this location. And so at this point in time, as I'm sure many of you can recall, because we talked about this a while back, but at this point in time, Thane was placed into the God Quarry and left there by Thanos. But in addition to that, what we come to find out later on in Asgardians of the Galaxy is that there was a little bit more to the story than what we had seen, because within that series and leading up to Thanos wins, and I mean like moments before Thanos was approached by Cosmic Ghost Rider, and just after he rejected Mistress Death, back at the God Quarry, you still had Trico, Euros, and Nebula, who had pretty much been deserted at this point. Like Thanos had left, Mistress Death had disappeared, like it had seemed like they had been just left there to figure it out on their own. But coming from here, once we get into the beginning of Asgardians of the Galaxy, as it turns out, we come to find out that not long after, Nebula had went into the God Quarry. And the way this is done is almost as if she doesn't remember how she went from the edge to the pit, which is understandable because there's a lot of things that have happened throughout the recent course of events that didn't exactly pan out the way that we think they did, and that's all because of Loki, but we'll get to that in a minute. But from what Nebula recalls, she was deserted here by Thanos, who, much like Thane, Thanos figured she was too weak to get out and he had just left her there. And for Nebula, that's not much of a surprise because he's always thought of her to be weak, so for him to do that in this particular instance would be no different. But while in the God Quarry, Nebula's challenge was to kill Thanos, which she did, and ironically in a similar fashion to what we had seen Requiem or Gamora do within the Infinity War saga. But for Nebula, almost immediately after doing so, she had realized that this wasn't real, and it's crazy because she's like, man, I'm good, but I'm not that good. This ain't real. So she kills Gamora, who's trying to congratulate her in this illusion, and she breaks free. And I gotta say, this is one of those things that makes me think of a lot of people who are quote unquote stuck in the God Quarry, to where there's a chance that some of them just might not want to be free. Like they go in, they see this wonderful lie, and it comes to the point of where they actually enjoy that lie more than life, or actually more than reality, and they choose to stay there. Just a thought. And I wouldn't mind getting like a God Quarry series that just focuses on the different people in there and telling the different stories. I think that'd be pretty cool. But leaving from here, Angela, Thor's sister, along with Annabelle Riggs, Scourge, Valkyrie, Thunderstrike, the Destroyer, and Throg, the Frog of Thunder, they arrive at Naglfar, where the space is just littered with the dwarfs of Nebula. And the strange part about it is that none of them have any nails, like they've been pried off seemingly for torture, but we come to find out there's a much deeper meaning than that. But as for Angela and the others, they've been led here through a number of attacks that they've been following, and most recently from the world of temples, where something ancient and deadly was stolen, which as it turns out was the Naglfar beacon, which was found and stolen by Nebula, who had also slaughtered the dwarfs of Nebula, save one, but doing so not without them making her one last weapon. And she promptly escapes as soon as they arrive. But what we come to find out is that her entire reason for doing this, like the sole purpose, was just to upstage Gamora, to whom Nebula had came to find out after leaving the God Quarry that Gamora was doing damage throughout the universe under the pseudonym Requiem, but having actually killed Thanos. But also throughout the course of Infinity Wars, she's been making that gap larger that started with Thanos but has always been in Nebula's mind of who is better between Gamora and Nebula. So on one hand, when you have Gamora tearing the universe apart, you have Nebula on the other hand who's like, what, she's doing it? No, I'm gonna do it bigger and I'm gonna do it better. But I gotta say, really just the whole thing with Requiem and really Infinity Wars in its entirety within Marvel Legacy, like that whole event was just a means to an end, because Loki's plans within themselves play much deeper than any of that. And I know that I mentioned this a while back, like during the time that we did some talk about Infinity Wars, which is the main reason I didn't focus a lot on the event, because just from reading it, you can tell that it was just put there to make sure that certain things happened with certain characters and new characters were introduced. And I still stand on that statement, because at the time after reading it, it's not like one of those things you read and you're like, man, that was a good story, but rather it's like you're more excited about the bigger story, and that being the War of Realms, to where you're like, okay, Infinity Wars just needs to happen, either as a distraction for the entire universe or as a tool for someone who has a much bigger plan, or both in the same. But amongst Angela and the others, Annabelle Riggs, who's like the archaeologist in the group and who was recruited here by Angela, Annabelle's brought here for a couple of reasons. Because one, she can actually read the inscriptions, which is how they finally discover what the Naglfar beacon is, but also Annabelle's brought here because her and Valkyrie share the same body. And for whatever reason, I feel like I gotta explain this a little bit because we haven't talked about it, and we really haven't had a reason to prior to this point, so why not just get it out the way real quick. But long story short, Annabelle was an archaeologist who had known Misty Knight for some time, which is something that we seen a while back throughout Fearless Defenders, where we discovered that Annabelle used her connection with Misty Knight to get her hands on a number of artifacts, to where some of which are of Asgardian origin, which is what originally drew the attention of Valkyrie, with it producing a melody that awakened Asgardian corpses. And this drew in Valkyrie, of course, because Valkyrie was supposed to originally escort the Asgardian dead to Valhalla. So when it was triggered, it got her attention, she came through, to where she initially met Annabelle and also got her attention, and not long after they became an item. But when the resurfacing of this artifact got the attention of Caroline Le Fay, the daughter of Morgan Le Fay and Dr. Doom, of whom we talked about recently on the Weapon Age playlist, but with Caroline Le Fay wanting to use this to resurrect the Doom Maidens, of whom Valkyrie didn't know that she was one of at one point, to where she had come to realize that much of her history was a lie. She had then became the Doom Maiden of Rage, and in Annabelle's attempt to stop her, which overall was successful, but at the cost of her life, to where her sacrifice had pulled Valkyrie back from her rage. But with the help of Clea, who's a one-time advocate of Doctor Strange, and was also like Dormammu's niece or something like that, but she had helped Valkyrie resolve this by having the two of them share the same body, both Annabelle and Valkyrie. And ever since then, Annabelle has pretty much been Shazamming into Valkyrie. So I just wanted to clear that up so nobody gets confused here, because that's one of those things that's not like recently explained in Marvel Legacy. It's one of those things you either remember from Marvel Now, which piggybacked off of issues of the Defenders from the 70s, or you just kind of just left to figure it out. But with Annabelle here, with Angela and the others, she discovers that the relic that Nebula had stolen was the Naglfar beacon. And this relic, which is pretty much a horn that is made out of the fingernails of dwarves from Neverdalir, not put my lips on that, but this horn or this beacon calls back the dead corpse from every Ragnarok ever throughout the course of eons, which is quite a few Ragnaroks, being that Ragnarok is a cycle of Asgard's death and resurrection. And after the destruction with Ragnarok, the corpses of these bodies, they drift into the void, and it's here in the void that they wait on their Naglfar ships to be called by the Naglfar beacon that they may return and engage in Armageddon. And on top of that, the crazy thing is within the void, there's not just your Asgardian corpses that are there, but because there are dozens of other pantheons with their own version of Ragnarok, they also occupy this void as well. But the twist in addition to all of this, once Annabelle figures this out and shares it with some of the others, is that prior to this point, Angela has plans of her own, which also go into her true intentions for why she really brought along Annabelle, which at the end of the day, truth be told, is because she struck a deal with Kid Loki. And in a recent video where we talked about the War of Realms and secrets being revealed, I'd explained why Kid Loki is not supposed to be here, with much of this having to do with Journey into Mystery, I think it was, where Loki had Hela remove his name from the Book of Hell so that anytime that Ragnarok would occur, he wouldn't truly die, he would just be reborn. And of course, when this initially happened, we got Kid Loki, but Kid Loki was also done away with back when the essence of Loki merged with him and restored Loki to his full self, which begs the question at this point in time, why is Kid Loki here during the events of Infinity Wars, which is a crazy reveal, but it's just one of the many tricks up his sleeve. But it's also around this time that we found out, one, that Kid Loki had made a promise to Angela, of which we have yet to find out, but also we learned through Kid Loki that throughout the course of time, Loki has time jumped to random destinations to assemble the naglfar beacon to cover his tracks so no one could follow exactly what he was doing. And prior to this point, much like Annabelle had mentioned, nobody really knew about this, which also played into Loki's favor of no one truly knowing what he was up to. But throughout the course of doing this, Loki made a trail for himself to find so that later at the right time he would be able to find the beacon, which is pretty much how they run into the problem here with Nebula finding it first. But it creates the situation where Kid Loki needs this band of misfits so that he can ensure that Armageddon goes down the way that he intended and not otherwise. But that'll do it for this one, guys. I really felt the need to go back and get into Asgardians of the Galaxy because I have this feeling that Loki is on the brink of pulling off the most elaborate scheme that we have ever seen him do. And I know that's a bold statement, but I'm sticking to it, especially with his new series that's coming up pretty soon. But all the way up till now, throughout Jason Aaron's Mighty Thor, God of Thunder, Infinity Wars, The War of Realms, Loki's been cooking up something huge, and I feel like in that series is a prime opportunity to show us how some of his plans were just trial and error, and this guy's done a lot of adapting throughout the series along the way. But like I said, that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.